Yes.
Good afternoon and welcome. We are just about to start. While we give people time to join, why don't you put your name and organization in the chat so we can see who's here, and we'll start in about 90 seconds. For those of you just coming in, we're waiting about 60 more seconds to let people join. Please put your name and organization in the chat and we'll just get started. All right, thank you so much for joining. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on using student data to improve K-12 tutoring. I'm Nancy Waymack and I serve as the Director of Partnerships and Policy for the National Student Support Accelerator. And we've got a fantastic group of speakers today. And thank you all for joining. It's nice to see some old friends and new in the chat. But before we go to our guests, I'm going to take a quick minute to share our definition of high-impact tutoring. High-impact tutoring is intensive, relationship-based, individualized instruction, and it has the following elements. Data drives instruction. It's embedded in the school day. It uses high-quality materials aligned with state standards. It occurs 3 or more times a week. It occurs in a small group setting of 3 or fewer students. The tutor is consistent and well supported and coached, and it's grounded in equity. If you'd like to learn more about high impact tutoring or share this information with colleagues, the QR code on this slide will take you to a presentation of each of the elements of high impact tutoring. You're welcome to use that presentation with your colleagues as however you would like. Today, we're going to focus on data use. Data can be used for program improvement, accountability, or just to tell a story. And today we'll talk about approaches to data collection, what data to collect, and what to do with it. So let's get to it. First, let's meet our panelists. I would love for you to introduce yourselves and say a little bit about how your work connects to using data to improve tutoring programs. Let's start with Latoya. Take it away, Latoya.
So good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, I should say. My name is Latoya Blackshear, and I serve as the Director of Planning and Evaluation for Jackson Public School. And in this role, I collect both district and state data, working closely with administrators to help them use the data to enhance their instructional practices and their programs. And we also had the pleasure of being one of the districts to participate in outcomes-based contracting with Southern Education Foundation as a part of the 2023 cohort, where we gained deeper understanding of just continuous improvement, use of the data, and outcomes-based contracting.
Great. Anne?
My name is Anne Sinclair. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at AMPACT. AMPACT is a national nonprofit that administers the AmeriCorps programs Reading Corps, Math Corps, and Early Learning Corps. We train and coach approximately 3,000 AmeriCorps tutors to serve more than 60,000 students per year in grades pre-K through 8 with evidence-based reading and math tutoring and progress monitoring. Data collection and analysis are not supplemental to our programs. They are at our program's core, and they drive all of our work with students, schools, and districts to ensure that we're producing meaningful outcomes.
Great. Shane?
Hi, I'm Shane Turano. I'm the Quality and Improvement Program Manager at the National Student Support Accelerator. So I help tutoring providers work toward evidence-based continuous improvement, including looking at their data use.
And Taryn?
Hey everybody, my name is Taryn Hochleitner. I'm the Director of Policy Insights at the Data Quality Campaign. DQC is a national advocacy organization, and we're working to change the role of data so that it works for everyone. We've spent almost 20 years working with state policymakers across the country to help develop policies that support effective data use, and we collect best practices for effective data use as well. So I'm here to just provide the national perspective for the policy and practice conditions that have to be in place for data-driven tutoring programs.
That's fantastic. So let's dig into some questions. And after we have about 30 minutes of questions, we'll go to Q&A for the audience. So get your questions for the panelists ready. There's a Q&A button. And when we get to that point in the program, we can go there for your audience questions. I'm going to start with Taryn and Shane. And let's start with collection. Before we even have data in hand, timely data is critical. So what are some common challenges you see when tutoring providers or districts attempt to collect data? How can tutoring providers and districts overcome these challenges? And let's start with you, Taryn.
Hey, thanks, Nancy. So I'll address this from the district perspective. Now, there are a number of challenges that districts face when they're working on new data collections. And more often than not, we find that these challenges are having to do with people rather than technology. So I'll just name a couple that are relevant for today. So the first is being able to collect data that's actually useful and accessible for the people that need to use it. So in order to really inform continuous improvement, data has to arrive in a format and a time that's really relevant for those that need to use it for decision making. So districts can address this by really making sure that collection is driven by need and by engaging the right voices and the right practitioners at the table at the beginning when they're developing measures, so that once that data collection happens, those people on the other side understand where those measures came from. The other challenge is just capacity. So data collection requires people, time, and money. And we know that districts have limited resources and already have to collect data for accountability purposes. And so districts can really tackle this by thinking through how they can build data collection and use into the culture of how they do business, and also think through how they can use data that they already collect for accountability purposes to support tutoring programs and using data to drive those programs. And then finally, a challenge we also hear is concerns about data privacy, especially when looking to share data with external providers like tutoring services. So in particular, districts have to think about the ways that the Federal Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA, applies to their sharing of data with these providers. So first of all, it's important to think of data privacy as just part of data collection, and privacy should always be a consideration when you're collecting data rather than an add-on. But also districts can work on addressing these privacy concerns by making sure they've established clear data governance policies and practices that establish clear decision-making and make sure there's someone in charge of making sure that data privacy is protected.
Great. And Shane, can you give us a perspective from a tutoring providers and others?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to echo and expand a little bit on what Taryn said. So I think we're all conscious of data privacy issues, and we're really trying to make every effort to keep student data safe in this heavily digital world. So having clear discussions of those needs, agreements, and expectations before launching the program is really important. Again, districts have a lot that they're doing in school beyond sharing data, so finding a regular cadence and streamlining those processes wherever possible will improve your data collection processes as well. And then finally, the last challenge I wanted to bring up was that data is collected in a lot of different ways across various sites. So it can be difficult to compare across different sites. So tutoring providers might want to develop alternative ways of gathering their own core data that they want to analyze, so that it can be standardized across all of the sites that you're serving.
Great, thanks. So Anne, what has been your experience as a tutoring provider with collecting data from your tutoring programs? And how do you ensure that it aligns with school, district, and state priorities when you report back to them?
Yeah, so our data collection and analysis processes are really embedded in our program implementation and our partnership with schools and districts. We share the data that our tutors collect with school staff in real time so that together they can make decisions about student eligibility and progress through our programs, and to make sure that it's relevant to those school and district goals. We collect screening data to determine eligibility for tutoring services. Then we progress monitor weekly using standardized, valid, reliable tools to ensure that those tutoring services are working. But in addition to those student outcome data, we're also making sure that we collect tutor implementation data so that we know that tutors are implementing programs with fidelity. We aim for all students to get 90 to 100 minutes of tutoring per week, and we track to make sure that tutors are achieving that. And we collect qualitative data on intervention pacing, tutor-student rapport, and student engagement. And those metrics shape the implementation of the program on the student level every day and contribute to the outcomes that we see. And those are the data that we use on a day-to-day basis, but we also partner with Serve Minnesota and the National Science and Service Collaborative to engage with data at a macro level and to inform a cycle of research and continuous improvement. So for example, in Math Core, we were curious if we could implement intervention in groups of 3 students and have similar effects as when students were tutored in pairs. Serve Minnesota found no differences in outcomes between those 2 groups, and so we were able to increase the number of students served by making a tweak to program implementation and serving 3 groups of students in 3 instead of in pairs. So using those data both on a day-to-day implementation level and also on a macro level to inform continuous improvement in partnership with districts.
That's great. Thank you. And thinking about those metrics that people are looking at, Shane, what are some of the key metrics that you think districts and providers should prioritize to ensure tutoring programs are successful? And why are they significant?
So I think student growth is always an important one, so that goes without too much explanation. However, we have seen some other metrics that make a really large difference in that student growth. So one of them is how supported those tutors feel through their work and how prepared they are in their pre-service training and through continuous coaching. The next one I would say is how engaged students are in their tutoring in terms of their goal setting and the amount of discussion that they're having within the session. And then finally, the strength of the relationship between the tutor and the student. So I would say that those are some key metrics that you would want to track as well.
Shane, so when we look at student performance data, we have nice numbers that come through on tests. But when we think about engagement data, it's a little harder to grab onto. So what kind of data are you talking about when you say engagement data, tutor support data, and those kinds of things?
Well, I think you can gather data in a lot of different ways. So data isn't always just numbers, although we might summarize student engagement, for example, in terms of numbers of how engaged a student they responded to in a student survey. For example, you might ask the students, how engaged are you feeling with your tutor during the session? And they might rate it on a 1 to 5 level. But those collecting the stories as well as to what's happening at all different levels within your organization, that is important data as well to look at.
Great, thank you. And Latoya, let's turn to Jackson Public Schools in Mississippi today. And tell us a little bit about something called outcomes-based contracting that you mentioned earlier. From what we hear, it works best when the right metrics are being measured, the right outcomes. Can you tell us about what metrics Jackson prioritizes and how and why that works for you guys?
So sure. So in our district, Nancy, everything we do is data driven. So the way we prioritize our metrics was based upon our baseline data. For our tutoring program, we selected or decided to focus on our middle school math students. And one of our goals was to, like Shane stated, proficiency. Our goal was to ensure that our students achieve proficiency on the state assessment. And for years, we've had a significant number of our students who are close to proficiency, but had not yet reached it. So proficiency, of course, was one of our top priorities, but that wasn't the only focus area or emphasis. We emphasized SEL, social emotional, attendance, and of course, later on, dosage became, we had already established a timeline for when we wanted tutoring to occur. But SEL, as you know, as Shane stated, is critical because relationships matter. You know, having that consistent tutor allowed our students to feel supported, and it helped the students to develop a deeper insight or connection with our students. You know, attendance was one of our key priorities. Students can't learn if they're not present. So they have to be present in order to receive the instruction. And then, as I said, later on, we began to turn our focus to dosage because we altered our dosage for one of our campuses. And that in turn told us whether our students voiced, and later on told us if they were receiving too much. So all of those were key components in order for us to see some success with outcomes-based contracting.
So Taryn and Shane talked a little bit about having the right data at the right time at the very beginning of this webinar. Can you say a little bit about how you're using that data and when you're using that data? Like when you get the dosage data, whether it's at the end of the semester or what that looks like and how that's changed over time?
So for us, like I stated, we've always been data driven, but I have to be honest and truly transparent when I tell this story is before embarking on the outcomes-based contracting journey, we didn't invest a significant amount of time of planning up front. With outcomes-based contracting, we're collecting, you know, we were already collecting our benchmark data, our tutoring data, feedback, our surveys. We were already collecting those things, but spending time at every one of our meetings was essential. And we started out saying, okay, we're going to meet bi-weekly, but those bi-weekly turned into weekly meetings where we looked at that data and made decisions on where we needed to shift in order to improve our outcomes. You know, in the past, we would view data collectively as a district every midterm or 9 weeks. You know, by the time you wait to the end, it's too late to really make a change or a shift. But because of outcomes-based contracting, the continuous improvement is formally embedded into the contract, and that is done during, and that required us to meet early, often, and develop actionable steps, you know, next steps. And at each meeting, we talked about those next steps. Okay, at the end of the meeting, this is what we're going to do. And then when we come back to meet again, we said, okay, this is what we said. How did it work? So using that data to inform instruction or shifts or practices were really impactful for us.
Great. So let's talk a little bit more about analyzing and usually using data to inform practice and improve programs. Taryn and Shane, once providers and districts have collected their data, what's the next step? LaToya told us a little bit about how it works in Jackson, but can you share a practical example of how analyzing this data has improved a program's impact? And we'll start with Taryn and then go to Shane.
Well, I think LaToya said it best. I think, when it comes to what happens next after data collection, the best way to make sure that data can inform changes in practice is really carving out time for data conversations and making sure it's embedded in practice, making sure there's dedicated time and space for the right people to be at the table to make sense of data and also develop action steps. That's also where district leaders can play a role to really making sure that staff have space and time to do that.
Right. And to piggyback off of what LaToya and Taryn are saying, having that regular protocol for analyzing the data and looking at the same data over time is really important. And I want to kind of go one step further and say that having those specific expectations well communicated to your tutors, tutor coaches, and program managers, so it's happening continuously, it's really easy for something like data analysis to become buried in that day-to-day those day-to-day tasks of what do we do? What do I need to do next? And you really need to take time to decide, is what we're doing working? Do we need to change course? Do we continue what we're doing? And then beyond that, the last point I want to make is just that you should use your data to purposefully take time to celebrate your wins so that everyone in your organization is reconnected to your mission and vision. And that data is going to tell a story of the impact that you're making on your students. And that's important to celebrate and bring throughout your organization.
I really like that point about celebration. We talk about it for improvement so much and think about looking at the deficits, but it's really nice to celebrate the wins too. Shane, you mentioned data protocols and looking at data over time in your comments. Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by a data protocol? And Taryn, you can certainly weigh in there too. What might that look like for a school district team or a tutoring provider team?
So a data protocol might look like step one, pull all of these data points. Step two, ask this specific question. And the questions that you are going to put on that protocol should be linked to your organizational goals for that time period. So you want to make sure that anybody who's looking at the data in a group over here, a group over there, that they're asking the same questions at all of these different sites. And those questions are related to the goals of the organization so that you have coherence throughout the entire organization.
And Taryn, who might be engaged in one of those data conversations that you mentioned, be it at the district or at a different level?
It's a great question. I think it probably depends on the context, right? So I think what matters is that everyone who has a role to play to actually make and implement the changes that are needed is at the table for those conversations. And also, I think it's important to make sure that, I think was mentioned before, that data kind of goes beyond numbers, that you're getting all the context that you need for the data. So also engaging families in those conversations periodically, or figuring out how to get those perspectives at the table is important too.
Great, great. LaToya and Ann, as practitioners, what have your program and district done with the data that you've collected? LaToya's told us a little bit about hers, but how does analyzing the data at the district level or tutoring site level inform your decision-making about tutoring services and partnerships? Ann, let's start with you and then we'll go to LaToya.
Yeah, so I love the references so far to the different levels of data sharing and reaction, that those cycles are so important to making sure that programs are working. And so at the site level, our coaches, tutors, and teachers are meeting on a monthly basis to review weekly progress monitoring data and student engagement data to ensure that those interventions are working. But then we roll those data up to classroom teachers, to school administrators, 3 times a year at the very least, to ensure they know how our programs are working in their buildings. Districts and schools have a lot of options when they're thinking about the intervention programs that they're going to use to serve their students. And it's really important that they use data to figure out how our program or those programs fit together to build a mosaic of services that serve the needs of all students in that building through MTSS. So we've seen both schools use our data on a regular basis to make decisions on how they'll use our program at the school level. And we've seen districts use our data to both celebrate the impact that we've had and also make decisions about how they might use our program in the future compared to other programs that they have available to them.
Latoya,
And I would say, echo everything Ann has stated. We use the data to evaluate both our program and instructional effectiveness to understand what's working and what's not working. Data helped us to identify student subgroups, specific student subgroups, teachers that needed additional support, to see if our students were receiving the right dosage, as I said, and even if we allocated resources effectively. But most important, I would definitely say too, with high impact tutoring, we were looking at or using the data to really determine the performance or how our students were performing on the standards. As I stated earlier, we engaged early and often and met regularly with our provider. And one of the examples I would definitely provide is when we were analyzing our data for standards mastery, ensuring that our students were mastering the standards, we discovered a high percentage of our students had not mastered specific standards. So we're using that data, and it prompted us a strong discussion. We know that our tutoring program was very short. It was approximately about a 7-week program. And we started asking within ourselves, because in our meeting, we had our data, the data person, myself, we had our curriculum and instruction, we had the principals in there. We also had where our providers met with our principals, some of our school champions, and we were talking to ourselves, okay, are we simply trying to expose our students to the standards, or do we want them to master the standard? So that conversation all was driven just by ensuring that we're looking at the data, we're utilizing the data. And so we prioritize mastery, of course, because deciding to spend extra time or an extra week on a standard, that helps to serve as a building block to other more complex mathematical skills. So we're using the data just to drive every decision that we make. Who should be at the table, how long we should spend on standards, what standards we need to go back and revisit, what students needed the additional support. So a lot of things comes out of the data when you're using it effectively. And I think Shane may have mentioned having that right tool or instrument that prompts that learning mindset.
that's great. And I love the way that you guys are focusing on mastery of a standard. And I'm curious, sometimes I've looked at data in the past as a practitioner and thought, okay, well, there's some growth here or there's some movement here, but I'm not sure what I should be expecting. Is this enough? Is this great? Is this knocking it out of the ballpark? Or is this kind of how do you work with districts and schools to understand that and think about how to set goals with their data?
Yeah. Ultimately, the goal of our programs is access to grade level content and proficiency eventually. And that's the reason that we use standardized, validated tools that are reliable for measuring student progress and foundational skills. And we use those tools because they are highly predictive of later success in school, they map directly onto standards. And so we've done that explicitly for some districts who have asked, hey, can you map your data onto the data that we're collecting? And so we can see how students in reading core or math core are performing on our assessments in addition to yours. So we've done that in a really specific way, but we also rely on those standardized assessments for a reason, that those are the most predictive of future success. And so we start with tools that are high quality, and we also can work with districts to partner in interpreting those data. You were muted, Nancy.
Sorry, Taryn, I saw you nodding, and I don't know if you had anything to add on that.
No, it's just great to hear about all these effective data practices in action.
Exactly. So for any of our panelists, data-driven tutoring really has the potential to address academic disparities and promote equity. That's, of course, one of the uses that we value the most. Can you discuss the kinds of data and analysis that help ensure equity in tutoring programs, or across the board for that matter? And just jump in if you want to start first, please.
Well, I'll start. I would say throughout the year, not just within our tutoring program, we analyze, as I stated earlier, our benchmark data, attendance data, a lot of data, along with our demographic information, our data, to ensure that our programs and our instructional practices meet the needs of all of our students. We believe that our approach, when I think about the tutoring program and what we decided to do, was a little different than most districts. Most districts typically choose their lower performing students for growth and all of those. However, we opted a more challenging subgroup, based upon, again, I spoke about our baseline data telling us where we needed to service or who we needed to service. And so we selected students who demonstrated a general mastery of the knowledge and skills needed for success in their grade or content area, but they're not yet proficient. So they were on the cusp, but not yet there. And so to help our students reach proficiency, both teachers and the tutors needed to kind of increase their instruction. So we use the data to kind of target what group we will service within this tutoring program, and then use the data. And by doing so, we notice a decline in our proficiency among our students with disability and among our Black and brown male students that participated in the programs. It prompted us to kind of enhance our professional development, and then we were wondering, why are our male students outperforming our female students? So, that prompted us to have a lot of conversations with our teachers, our principals, and simply they were just saying, maybe our females, or what we've seen, our females are asking for more support or more assistance than our male students. Could be one of the reasons as to why they're outperforming. So we use data to target our specific subgroups, and then again, just continuing to make those shifts.
That's great. Anybody else?
Yeah, I can piggyback on that. I loved hearing how you match the services to the students that you're going to serve within the mosaic of services that you have available to you in your district. For us, it starts with training and coaching. All tutors receive training in the value of equity skills, relationship building, and are coached on the way they apply evidence-based standard protocol supports to all the students that they serve. And it ends with data, reviewing disaggregated results to ensure that all students are making adequate progress toward those grade level benchmarks. So one of the benefits of partnering with Serve Minnesota and the National Science and Service Collaborative is that they're able to disaggregate the data that our tutors collect by race, English learners, price lunch status. So this allows us to analyze any disparities that arise and adjust accordingly. For example, when one of our states was able to identify that service was not reaching a high enough proportion of students in the state receiving free and reduced price lunch, they were able to adjust their site recruitment and their tutor placement efforts to increase placements at schools with those higher free and reduced price lunch rates. So using the data to guide the way that our programs are implemented in real life.
That's great. That's great.
Hey, Nancy, I just want to jump in just to underscore what Latoya and Anne are both saying and just highlight the importance of data disaggregation in making these practices possible, right? So making sure that that goes into the data collection, making sure that the data can be disaggregated, and also depending on the district's context, they might be interested in different student populations. So that's important to kind of tailor to the community. That's just a critical piece of using data for equity.
Fantastic. So right before we go to the audience Q&A, I have one more question for you guys, and we'll do it in kind of a lightning round approach. And I'm going to start with Shane. Same question for everyone though. What's one action step that districts and tutoring providers can take today to start improving how they analyze and use student data to strengthen their tutoring programs? Shane, let's start with you, and then you can popcorn to the next person.
Okay, sounds great, Nancy. Thank you. So my takeaway would be to not let data become something that's rote and unmeaningful, that at the end of your data analysis, you should have a really strong action plan that builds off your strengths and then and also brings in other resources to help you with the places you want to make improvement. And then I'll popcorn over to Anne.
Yeah, for tutoring providers, I would say work with districts to fit into the systems they already have for collecting, analyzing, and responding to data. I would say never collect data if you're not using them to improve student outcomes. And I'd also recommend continued partnership with research institutions to conduct rigorous studies of tutoring programs. For districts, when choosing a tutoring partner or provider, rely on that rigorous evidence to select only tutoring programs that have the strongest likelihood of making an impact on students. And I will popcorn to Latoya.
All right, so I should have gone first. Y'all stole my answers. But I will say district leaders are very busy. As Shane and Ann say, we are very busy. It's critical that as district leaders, we stick to the plan. Early on, go ahead and develop a meeting and data cadence. Stick to it. Discuss your next steps and prioritize those next steps to start at the beginning of every meeting. So don't veer away from it. Don't get sucked up in the whirlwind. Keep the main thing, which is develop a meeting and data cadence. Stick to it and start every meeting by reviewing whether those steps or strategies had a meaningful impact.
And I'll close this
And
out.
I was going to say, Taryn, I'm sorry.
No worries. So just, those are all such great ideas. So the only thing I would add is just for districts, think about data governance. So this is a little bit outside of the conversation, but it's very complementary, making sure that you have formal decision-making process for ensuring data quality, data protection, data use across the district can really make sure that you have the right structures and data collections in place that support this work.
That's great. Thank you all very much. And now we've got a few questions from the audience. So I'll start with one that is, what specific type of data would you use to determine the strength of the tutor or student relationship?
So I'll jump in on that one. So I would say student surveys at the end of certain periods, after the first 4 weeks, after the first 8 weeks, just having the student, and that might take a variety of forms. For younger students, that might look like shading in happy faces on a survey. And then for older students, they might do it on a Google form or of some sort. But then also once you have that data and you identify after you've pulled it apart and picked at it and seen where there might be room for improvement, going to talk to those students one-on-one and seeing what is happening and what's working and what's not working, and getting those stories behind the data as well.
Great. Anybody else want to respond to that one?
I'd add to that one a little bit. We use observational data. So we observe tutors implementing interventions. Look at adherence, fidelity. We also look at quality. So we're looking at how engaged the student is, how many minutes of the session they are engaged in the instruction, whether or not the tutor is using relationship and rapport building strategies, like asking about the child, like pronouncing their name correctly. So those are some of the observational data that we're collecting in a qualitative way to give the tutor direct feedback on how to improve the quality of their instruction.
Great. And we've had a question to ask a little bit more about what Anne and Taryn, and I think maybe Latoya too, what programs you're implementing and what your roles are again. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do exactly and with whom? And Taryn, we'll start with you since you're sort of in the umbrella organization.
Yes, thank you. So I'm not actually implementing any programs. So my organization, the Data Quality Campaign, we really live in the policy space and in the best practices space and just trying to learn about what policy conditions are necessary for effective data use across the country.
Great. And Anne?
Yeah, I work for AMPACT, which is the organization that administers Reading Corps, Math Corps, and Early Learning Corps. We train AmeriCorps members to tutor in schools. So we partner with schools to implement evidence-based reading and math intervention. We're in several states across the country, Minnesota, Wisconsin, California, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, New York, Idaho. I'm not going to be able to rattle them all off, but that we work in several states across the country. My role as Chief Learning Officer is to oversee the development of the coaching and training models that we use to train our AmeriCorps members to be able to implement evidence-based practices.
I'm going to add DC to that list. And Latoya, do you want to say a little bit about the programs that you guys administer in your district?
So we, again, this was our first time engaging in high impact tutoring as with Southern Educational Foundation outcomes-based contracting. And we engaged with Edmentum FEV Tutoring to carry out that specific task.
Great. Did you want to add anything about the strength of the tutor-student relationship, about the specific data that you look at there?
So I would definitely say with that, we do exactly what Anne and Shane stated, the observation, but most important, I believe, is the qualitative data, the surveys from the students. They were very powerful and telling in regards to us making shifts when we did. I go on record of saying, at one of our schools, the tutoring times was much longer than any of the other of our campuses. And while I thought, and the teachers, the principals, we were all excited about it, that, oh, we have this time where we could implement, tutoring a little bit longer. Our students said, no, we don't want that any longer. That was great. And we saw they were really tired by the time they got to the second round. And that also impacted their scores on their exit. It impacted their engagement because it went from them being fully engaged to probably just clicking on to say I satisfied being in tutorial. So I said all that to say the data we collected from our students or getting student and teacher feedback is powerful and it's very telling. And they also told us when they enjoyed it and loved it. So we appreciate that very much of
Great.
incorporating that. And I also want to say, Nancy, our surveys actually came from NSSA. So we appreciate that as well. So
Sure. And I think Zayza put links to our surveys in the chat earlier, and I'm sure she might do that again since you just mentioned it. But we have several examples that people can access. So we have several great questions from the audience. I'm going to dive right in. What type of data is most important for you to look at weekly? In what format do you look at the data in? How do you access that data? And Anne, what do you share with districts? And then Latoya, if you have anything to add to that, that'd be great.
I'll share that in our Reading Core program, for example, we're looking at a graph of student progress monitoring data. So we use FastBridge assessments to get a quick fluency score on either oral reading fluency or letter sound fluency. And we're plotting those data every week to see if there is improvement or not. We plot the number of minutes that the student is getting in dosage so that we can make adjustments to dosage if we need to. We track the reasons that students are absent from a tutoring session or a tutor is absent from a tutoring session so that we can problem solve and make sure that students are getting the dosage that we want them to get before we're making decisions about changing intervention. So we really follow the evidence-based practices in terms of collecting and analyzing regular progress monitoring data to make intervention decisions.
Great. And Latoya, I think you said you also look at attendance. Is there anything else you'd add to that list?
So we look at weekly our attendance, we look at mastery, and we also look at our tutor match rate.
And that's to make sure you have consistency in tutors and tutor-student pairs, right?
That's correct. The
Right.
SEL is a big factor for us.
Yeah. Awesome. And what format do you get that data in? Is it a dashboard? How do you access that data?
So for us, it's two ways. We receive it in a spreadsheet through a secure site that we share with our data analysts so we can further review the data for other analysis. But also the tutoring provider provided us with a dashboard where we can see all of the data points that I've stated here. So it's kind of two ways, but we do have a dashboard that the teachers, that administrators and district office can log into to view the data real time, because that was important as well. And it also allows us to, what I didn't share in terms of feedback is all of our tutoring sessions are recorded. So the principal and the teachers, myself, district personnel, district leaders can go back and watch recordings for further information to help us make decisions.
Great. And Shane, I'll ask you this question. What suggestions do you have for partnering with school districts who are hesitant to share any type of student data with tutoring partners?
So interestingly enough, at the conference, at our conference in May, we talked a lot about building relationships right up in the beginning. So before you start asking for data, before you start requiring different things from people, we talked about how important it was, as Latoya's kind of been discussing, to build that relationship, to build the trust, and to make those expectations really clear. So I think that's the first part, the first place to start. And then talking, I think coming from a place of curiosity of, what they feel comfortable providing you is also a really good place to start, so that they come into the conversation willingly and saying what their piece is, what they're comfortable with.
Great. Anybody else want to add to that? Okay.
Just on a technical note, if districts are kind of navigating how to safely share data with external partners like tutoring providers. I know that the Federal Privacy and Technical Assistance Center, or PTAC, has a lot of great resources that districts can use to kind of make sure that they're navigating that safely.
Great. One more thing I would just add to that is to be super clear about why you want that data. It's not to, you need to just articulate that very clearly so that districts can understand the purpose behind it, which I think will be really important in that effort. Okay, so our next question is, how much more valuable is third-party data on assessments like iReady or something like that for determining the efficacy of a program, a tutoring program, as opposed to a vendor's or provider's own assessments? In other words, if a vendor or provider isn't using a third-party assessment, how much does it hurt them?
That is such a good and complex question, and I am so glad that you are thinking about that, because there are trade-offs in terms of the different kinds of assessments that you can use to prove the efficacy of your program. I just want to put in a pitch here for the Accelerate study that just came out this spring of tutoring providers that looked at a meta-analysis of tutoring providers and compared their efficacy using standardized assessments and effect sizes across large-scale studies of tutoring programs. And I would encourage districts to use the What Works Clearinghouse and Evidence for ESSA to identify programs that have gone through rigorous evaluation. And if you've gone through rigorous evaluation, you can still use an assessment that the tutoring provider has created to show that students are making progress through specific skills that the tutoring provider has identified with the district are important towards gaining proficiency later. But that is really important, that the evidence is rooted in a standardized assessment provided by technical adequacy.
Okay, great. And due to the fact that our programming window does not always align with district and state assessment windows, we need to ask our teachers to administer and collect additional assessment data during the programming window. This creates conflict between adding teacher non-value add time and getting student outcome data. I'd like to ask if the panel has suggestions or insights on how to resolve that conflict. Thank you. That's a toughie. And while y'all are thinking, I'll offer something that maybe you can react to. And there may be teacher assessments or other assessments that are happening on a interim basis or on a weekly basis that might be able to be integrated into that data that's being collected for the purposes of tutoring. So if those two things are aligned, you might be able to make some progress there. Shane or others, do you have thoughts on that?
Right. I was going to kind of jump in there and say that, when we think about assessments, they don't always need to be these large assessments. The exit tickets given and the smaller question sets given at the end of each tutoring session can go a long way in terms of showing growth and showing assessment. So if it's time that you're worried about, you might consider taking a larger assessment and breaking it up into smaller pieces in order to provide them across different sessions.
And I would definitely ditto what Shane said. Our provider actually did just that at the end of every tutoring session. Our students were given 3, of course, their feedback, the survey rating their tutor, and they rated the session, of course, as well, but they were also given 3 questions that were aligned to today's lesson to check for mastery as well. So maybe breaking it up, because we don't, as a school district, you don't want one more assessment that we're already given. So that will be a very manageable if you chunk it up, as Shane said, and right after a tutoring session ends.
Right. Next question is, could the panel provide a few examples of collecting data and student outcomes that can be standardized and compared across programs?
I mean, I've given a couple using, when tutoring providers use a standardized assessment, that can be compared across programs or compared with district outcomes. We never want to double assess, so collaborating with district partners to ensure that assessment only happens once. If the school is already doing it, there's no need for us to also collect it to use the systems that are already in place to be able to compare across programs. But again, I'd go back to those rigorous studies of programs because those are the ones that use standardized assessments.
I think there are some sort of input level data points that you can always compare against other districts. And I'm thinking of things like attendance and dosage. And even though those outputs or outcome measures may be different across sites, those inputs may be easier to start with comparing across sites. Does anybody have other thoughts on that question? Okay. So the next question is, I'm curious what technology data providers use to manage their data. We've outgrown our proprietary database and are looking at Salesforce and other projects. Any recommendations? Maybe they'll shoot you a chat. Leave your email, maybe they'll send you a chat on that. I saw one other question in the chat that I think might be good to start with or end with rather. If anyone has an example of where data has really changed the way that you're practicing or made a decision that has changed the program, please provide that. And that would be really good to understand what the data was and what the practice was that changed.
So I'll jump out there then.
Okay.
I would definitely say the exit tickets, the data that we collected from there. And I'll start by saying real simple, I hope, and you tell me if not. But I'll start by saying after our students, we noticed the first couple of weeks, and it's about a week and a half, our students were not performing well on the exit tickets. We were reviewing the recordings. We were doing observations as our students were engaging with their tutors. And what we found as we were like, okay, why are they not performing well on this? So using observation, using the recordings that we were watching, using just feedback from our teachers, we noticed some alignment challenges to the way that the tutors were presenting the information and assessing the information was not quite aligned to our standards. So we took the data, took samples, and in our continuous improvement meeting, which I love, I'll put that back in there, that, we had a standing meeting and we brought all of our concerns to that meeting where we were able to meet with our partner and they brought in their curriculum specialists. We brought in our district academic curriculum specialists together. They talked about those particular standards, those items, tweaked it, and then we were getting to see the traction that we wanted to see. It all landed on that continuous improvement process though. And it took all of us working together. We owned ours, our part, they owned their part, so that, it improved both us, the district, and as the provider as well. So because of that data usage and us meeting and us reviewing the outcomes for our students, We found that the partner, our provider, they every week before those items were introduced to our students, our lovely scholars, they would send it to us to ensure alignment was 100% on point. And we
That's
appreciate that.
fantastic. Yeah, that's great. I think that's a great place to bring it close to an end. I think we've heard some great pieces of advice and information from our panelists, understanding what data we want and for what purposes, having consistent data meetings that focus on that data over time with a data protocol, keeping the main thing, as LaToya says. There are some resources that have been in the chat and we'll continue to share with you. There is a post-webinar survey in Zoom after this webinar is going to end. And we have a couple more slides, I believe. We wanted to remind you very quickly that NSSA has recently introduced a tutoring badge. Take our self-assessment, see how well your program does, and look at ways to improve it in the areas that don't align with high impact tutoring, and then move on to getting a tutoring program badge to show alignment with high impact tutoring. You can find that on our website. If you need more tools and resources, please scan the QR code to find all of our resources. You can find a number of them listed here. There will be more on our website. And you can subscribe to our monthly newsletter using this QR code. You can also find that link on our website. And please follow us on social media, including LinkedIn, X, and Instagram. This recording of this webinar will be on our website and you can reach it there. And please take our post-webinar survey on Zoom. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you to our panelists. Have a great day.